Hi, you're watching BloombergQuint. As you know, yesterday's GST Council meeting did not result in a consensus decision on the contentious issue of GST compensation cess. We've discussed this often enough, both on discussions as well as through editorials on BloombergQuint. So I won't get into the background. I would like to immediately introduce my guest. The West Bengal Finance Minister, Amit Mitra, joins me today to take us through the events of yesterday's meeting and steps ahead for at least the 10 states that have opposed the centre's two options put on the table to be able to recoup this compensation cess situation. Dr. Mitra, thank you very much for joining us here on BloombergQuint. Let me begin by asking you why the 10 states were not able to reach a consensus with the remaining 21 in yesterday's GST Council meetings.
First of all, I don't think we should count the 21 that people are talking about who seem to have written a letter, because two of those states that they were talking about said in the meeting they did not write it. It was misinterpreted. Okay. So let's not talk about 21. Puducherry said, the chief minister himself said, this is not right. We did not pick any option. The Andhra Pradesh Honorable Minister said the same thing. So I think that those numbers are not relevant here, because it is those who are physically present is what matters in GST Council. That's the rule. Let me start by saying that why did these states, cutting across India, cutting across parties, why did they say it? Prior to that, let me add, in the last meeting, there were 17 states which gave an opinion. 15 of whom, including Gujarat, said that centre should borrow. That was the last meeting. Only 2 states said maybe the states can borrow. One was Goa and the other was Bihar. So 15-2 was the tally in the last meeting. Now then, of course, some things happened. I don't know what behind the scene things happened. As far as yesterday's meeting is concerned, why did these 10 states, as you have asked, say this? Because it is very clear. First, ability to borrow and the constitutional mandate to borrow. Who has the ability to borrow? State Bank of India study says only 8 states, imagine just 8 states have the capacity to borrow 2 more %. That means the states don't have the capacity to borrow. They're not able to pay salaries. They're not able to pay pensions, some of them. So who has the ability to borrow? Number 1, the centre. Number 2, does it have a mechanism to borrow from the Reserve Bank of India? Yes. Do the states, can they go to Reserve Bank and borrow? The answer is no. They have to go to the market. They have to do competitive bidding, 31 entities, and they have to borrow. That's number 2. Number 3, what about the rate of borrowing? The central government can borrow at almost 2% less. It's called the GSEC rate, government securities rate. So they have the capacity to borrow. They have the instrumentalities to borrow of a special window, which they speak about. That's only of the centre's capacity. And the rate they will get is lower. On the other side, if the states borrow, who cannot pay salaries, cannot pay pensions, and State Bank of India study says only 8 of them can even consider borrowing. It's obvious that the states will sink, because in their books they will have huge borrowing, which will be there, etc. Now, last point, why was the centre saying that they don't want to borrow? It's a written text which they gave us. One was apparently the yield drops, they said. So I'm quoting. Now, yield drops when centre borrows, but when states borrow, 31 of them, yields don't drop. The second reason given by centre is there will be macroeconomic repercussions. Hello? States who are implementing COVID on the ground, and by the way, Nirmala Sitharamanji very correctly said in the meeting that I am aware that it is the states which is implementing the war against COVID. And you are trusting on those states which are implementing the COVID war, whose economies are collapsing, who cannot pay salaries and pensions. You're asking them to borrow when you have instrumentality to borrow. So therefore, I would say very briefly, that it is clear by any form of macroeconomics that it is the center which borrows as a window from the Reserve Bank of India. I'm very glad that the mainstream media has published that Reserve Bank of India itself is saying it's much easier for center to borrow. One entity, window available, you come and borrow. And last, fiscal deficit can be monetized by center. Can the states monetize fiscal deficit? No. So states are completely incapacitated in this situation relative to the government of India. And all these arguments were made in different ways by different states. And therefore, it was cogent. There was no reply to those arguments.
Dr. Mitra, you made the point that only a handful of states, 8, can actually borrow. I'd like you to explain that a little bit more, especially in the context of the fact that Mr. T.V. Somnathan of the Finance Ministry had explained to us in a conversation on BloombergQuint that whilst there was not going to be any RBI window from which states could borrow, because there is no such existing mechanism, the center was considering issuing some sort of letter of comfort so that states could go ahead and borrow to make up for this compensation shortfall. And that letter of comfort would effectively be backed by future compensation CESS revenue collection post the extension beyond 2022. Now, do you have a clear idea of what the modality of borrowing would be, how that would help keep state yields lower, and therefore expand the pool of the number of states that can in fact borrow?
May I separate the two things you've said? One is what this official has said to you on record. First, very important for your listeners to understand, there is no window for the states to borrow from Reserve Bank of India, which is what he's saying. Center has a window. That's known to you. Number two, he's saying he'll give a comfort letter. This is the first time I'm hearing, because officially the note of the central government says we will help you to have a window for borrowing. It's still written. Now an official comes up and says, no, there is no such instrumentality or methodology, so we'll only give you a comfort letter. So that's one part of the process which worries me. That center doesn't know what it's talking about. It's giving in writing that we will create a window for you to borrow. The official is saying there's no such window possible. We can at best only give you comfort letter. That's one part. Second part you've said is regarding the CESS. Where will this borrowing, where will the money come from to pay for the principal and the interest? You'll be happy to know that agenda number 9 of yesterday's meeting, the agenda was, can we extend the date? What will we do with regard to extending the date of CESS payment? This is before any discussion on borrowing, because borrowing was agenda number 9A, that had not come. I must tell you, we all said, I did, so did many other ministers who later said center should borrow, unanimously said the CESS should be extended. Now, question was 2, 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. I intervened and said it should be as long as it takes for the borrower, which we obviously want the center to borrow, as long as it takes 5 years, 6 years, whatever it is, till the principal and interest is completely paid. We should extend the CESS. That is what should be recorded in the minutes. So look at the cooperative federalism at that point of time. We all agreed unanimously, extend the CESS. And I proposed indefinitely so that entire principal and interest is paid. That's the second part of your question. That is not a problem. So it brings you back to your original question. Having extended the CESS, item number 9 of the agenda, unanimously, who will borrow? That is item number 9A of the agenda, which took 6 hours of discussion.
Dr. Mitra, you've explained in previous interviews, both to BloombergQuint and otherwise, why you believe that whether it is the constitutional amendment that allowed for the implementation of GST or the GST Compensation to States Act both make it clear that it's the center's job to come up with this compensation, and therefore it should be the center's responsibility to borrow. I don't mean to, ask you to reiterate those arguments, but given the fact that the center is not conceding that point, the center is making it clear, as did the finance minister yesterday, that this is an extraordinary pandemic situation, and hence, neither the constitutional amendment nor the act has provided for it, and a new modality needs to come up. Is that something that states like yours would eventually agree to?
See, one thing is very clear. This question of who will borrow had come up on the 18th of February 2017 in the GST Council meeting. Exactly the concern that is being talked about today. And the secretary of the GST Council meeting, the Revenue Secretary, Dr. Adya, is quoted in the minutes as saying, central government could raise resources by other means for compensation. And this could be then recouped by continuation of CESS beyond 5 years. Who's saying this? Government of India's Revenue Secretary, who's the Secretary of the GST Council, in the presence of the chairperson, late Mr. Arun Jaitley. In clarification to the states, please do not worry. I am telling you on record on behalf of my chairman and myself as secretary, central government, these are the words used. And this is why the states that day did not want to argue on the words anymore. Parliament shall, they saw and they were satisfied. 5 years, they were satisfied. And in between whatever the words, the implementation of GST and so on, was the fear was allayed by the Secretary of the Council, as a result of which everybody agreed. Now today, that is what the center is going back on. The clarification given on record. It's in the minutes on 18th of February 2017 of the GST Council meeting. Now I come to the second point. As late as March 14, 2020, Sitaramanji herself said it was the solemn commitment to the states. The center is duty bound to give compensation to the states. Duty bound. This is on 14th of March 2020 in the 39th meeting of the GST Council. So again, the same reassurance given by Honorable Union Finance Minister Sitaramanji. Therefore, the states which are saying, you please borrow and give us, and we have already passed that you will not have to pay 1 penny from your pocket. It will entirely come from the cess collected as long as it takes. We have unanimously passed that. So you have no fear of servicing the debt or paying the principal. All you have to do is use your window, which states do not have, as you correctly said, as the official correctly said. Use your window, borrow the money and give it to the states. It's very simple. It's a consistency, and I'm reminded. Arun Jaitley in 2013 in a chamber meeting of the annual general body meeting of a major apex chamber meeting said, we BJP do not support implementation of GST. Why? We don't trust the government, at that time UPA government, to compensate the states. Now his words are ringing in my ear today. That after this kind of clarification by the Secretary of the Council, Finance Minister herself on 14th of March, by the way, when I mentioned this in the meeting last time, she confirmed that yes, I said it, because it's on record. So where is the dispute? We have no window. We have no capacity to borrow. So says the State Bank of India study. And you say, you go and borrow?
Dr. Mitra, what is the resolution of this situation? Because the center presents a whole host of arguments that differ from the arguments that states like yours have presented. They have presented the Attorney General's view, saying that compensation can be paid only from the compensation cess fund, not from the Consolidated Fund of India. Like you pointed out, yields could rise if the center was to borrow further, because the center has other borrowing pressures as well. There could be macroeconomic implications. I won't reiterate all those arguments, but both sides seem to be firmly entrenched in their views. And yesterday, the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, in her media briefing, when asked, did not show any indication of the center revising its two options. She reiterated the same two options that were made public several weeks ago. So how does this resolve itself?
See, there is underlying all this is also what is happening in the council, which has never happened before. After 6 hours of discussion where the Union Finance Minister and the Minister of State and officials of the Government of India sat and listened patiently, which was very, very good. Then what happens? Suddenly, the Secretary Revenue, which is the Secretary of the GST Council, suddenly, from nowhere, says the meeting is closed. The DEA has agreed to facilitate the states in borrowing. The meeting is closed. These were his words. Now, you as an official, you're saying this to the chief ministers of state sitting across the table, the deputy chief minister of state, the elected finance ministers of states across the country. So meeting is closed. I was honestly shocked. It has never happened in GST Council that an official would simply say meeting is closed when there's a division in the House of almost equal proportion, which either has to be rediscussed and a consensus arrived at, or you have division, which is called voting. These are the two options given in the rules of the GST Council. And in complete disregard, the secretary says meeting is closed. On the face of the chief ministers and deputy chief ministers, I've never seen this in my life. So what I'm saying is underlying this is a methodology which didn't exist before. Union Finance Minister patiently listened. Very good. And suddenly comes this, just like last time, when we discussed for 5.5 hours, and suddenly comes two options. Why not give the options at the beginning of the meeting? So 5 hours can be spent on discussing the options. No. Suddenly. This worries me. Never happened in 40 meetings of the GST Council, where last time's options suddenly given, and yesterday's meeting, shockingly, Secretary simply says meeting is closed, where no decision had been reached. And then, of course, many ministers jumped in and said, you cannot close the meeting. Either we have a consensus or you have voting, division. That's the rule. So what worries me is, while the Union Finance Minister was so patient in listening, the Secretary says this. Now, if he's saying this on his own, I am amazed. If he's saying this under some kind of a backroom chat or discussion, then I'm really disappointed. This methodology is never seen in the history of 42 GST Council meetings. So what I'm saying to you is, what the Union Finance Minister is saying in the press conference, as you quoted her, that she is not quite, ready to accept any options. May I mention that my Chief Minister, Mamata Banerjee, wrote to the Prime Minister, giving an option. What is the option? Option is, we unanimously will say the CESS will be extended as long as you need, which happened yesterday. 2, you will borrow, the Government of India, and will not have to pay 1 paisa. This was an official suggestion of Mamata Banerjee to the Prime Minister of India. So here's the solution for you. That's option 3. So what shocks me is the methodology, the options on the table, division in the House visible. So I'm hoping that the central government in the next 1 week, we have a week to reflect on, will think about all these arguments and be logical and methodology be corrected to follow the rules.
Dr. Mitra, if there is no change in the center's position, given that there has been no change between the last meeting and yesterday's meeting, and assuming that there is no change between yesterday's meeting and the next one, is it therefore a foregone conclusion that the matter will be put to vote? And if that is the case, then do you believe that the several states that are governed by BJP and or its allies will vote in favor of the two options, any one of them presented by the government, whereas the minority, which is about 10 states or so, will vote against, and yet the vote will carry, therefore, in favor of what the center has proposed?
See, I do not want to go to hypothetical processes. We don't know what the states will do. Maybe the other ministers who are not present today, it is physical presence of the ministers that is required.
Okay.
Maybe more will be present. Maybe their views will change. Maybe the central government will rethink. Maybe the arguments made will have some telling effect. I do not want to make a hypothetical case of what will happen. Okay, 7 days has been given. We will all look at and reflect on what is this about, what the arguments made. That's the way democracy should function. So I don't want to make a hypothetical guess. But I'm glad on one point that probably you want to ask me relating to what Ms. Sitharaman did with regard to CESS that had been received.
I was just going to bring that up. I think there were 2 or 3 announcements yesterday. One is the 97,000 crore rupee option has been marginally increased to 1,10,000 crores. That was one thing that the finance minister announced. The second thing she announced was that 20,000 crores in compensation cess collected for this particular financial year was to be dispersed as of last night itself to the states. And the third issue, which is a far more complex issue as well, is the issue of IGST. And she did announce a redistribution of some of the earlier IGST payments. I want you to talk us through each of these and explain what the implications are.
No, I think many members, many ministers, chief ministers, deputy chief ministers, finance ministers said across political parties, said you are sitting on a CESS fund. We don't know exactly how large it is. It could range between 20,000 to 36,000 crores because we have no information on that. Collected since April. Why are you holding on to it? Please give it to us. There's no reason. It is in the CESS fund. It's not even in Consolidated Fund of India, probably. And she was when she heard that, she said, yes, I'm cleaning up all these things. Therefore, I assure you that tonight, this 20,000 crores, which you talk about, she said 20,000 crores, we didn't know the figure, will be given to the states. And I'm happy that that commitment she made to the council was kept, and all of us got something out of it. West Bengal got close to 1,000 crores, 993 crores, came in last night at 9 o'clock. Second, what about this 25,000 crores of IGST that you speak about? I'd like to very briefly explain what this is about. In 2017-18, 1,76,000 crores came in to the central government through the Consolidated Fund of India of the central government. 1,76,000 crores from IGST. Now, what would have been the normal process? Immediately, you divide it into half. 88,334 crores would have gone to the states. 88,334 crores would have been kept by the center in the Consolidated Fund of India. That's step one. Did it happen? The answer is no. And who has caught it? CAG, Controller and Auditor General. You're not supposed to do this. Number two, once it happened and questions were getting raised, what did the center do? And this shows you the incompetency or underlying intent, whichever you want to choose. When they learned that this is a problem, they took the entire 1,76,000 crores and 44% of that entire amount was given to the states. Absolutely wrong. What you're supposed to do is first give half to the states, the remaining half, which is with the center in the form of tax, 42% of that you give to the states. They didn't do that. Now this created, again, CAG has pointed this out, so I'm not saying. As a result, this was a festering wound. It was not during Sitharamanji's time. It's 2017-18. So when this question came up, the government of India tried to correct itself and they gave 33,000 crores to the states. Now the 25,000 crores will settle this account. But you know what is rather difficult? Some states, because of this mistake, I would call it, there is some intent behind it, whatever the reason, some states will have to return money.
Yes.
I am told that Bihar, of which is the chairperson of the GST Council, my officers tell me, rightly or wrongly, that Bihar has to return 3,000 crores. I know Karnataka spoke up in the meeting and said, we have to return, madam, 1,700 crores. Now, luckily, West Bengal was not paid its due. 993 crores came in last night. So it is not complicated. It is simple, violation after violation, ultimately backtracking, giving 33,000 crores, not the whole amount. And now the group of ministers says, you still owe the states a total of 25,000 crores, you better give it. And whoever has to return it, better return it. That's the understanding of the IGST. I've clearly enunciated to you.
Thank you very much, sir, because it is a complex issue. And, you know, I think whilst Ms. Sitharaman yesterday also did try and explain it and said some states got more than they ought to have, and that money will be returned. This was a very helpful explanation. I'll come back to the issue. I know you are hesitant to offer any hypothetical outcome, you know, but given the fact that this compensation cess issue has been now festering for almost a year, sir, you know, earlier it was the issue of delayed payments that persists even now. You know, then it was, of course, the issue of who will borrow and pay. I just want to try and understand, for instance, what would be the shortfall that West Bengal would face on account of this compensation cess issue? And if you had to borrow it, if it came down to that, what would it mean for a state like yours? Would you be able to borrow the requisite amount? What kind of strain would it put on your state finances?
See, we already have in 6 months, April, May, June, July, August, September, probably our due at the budgeted rate of growth originally would be about 9,000 crores plus. So at the end of the year, we will perhaps have the difference between 7% and 14%, too complex, but basically we will have about 14 to 15,000 crores due. As per the commitment of the GST Council, that if states do not grow at 14%, they grow at anything less, the rest would be compensated. That's the understanding of the parliamentary amendment. So the question is very simple. There is no doubt in anybody's mind or any economist's mind or people who are aware of this and educated on this subject, that the simple methodology is what Reserve Bank of India is saying, according to mainstream media. Just simply come back and borrow from your window. And let not one paisa be taken out of your budget. Let it be entirely serviced, principal and interest, by the GST, by the CESS collected for an indefinite period. And I say that emphatically because yesterday we passed this unanimously, that irrespective of how long it takes, whoever borrows will get this. Now, states don't have the capacity to borrow. And as I said, State Bank of India is saying only 8 states, if at all, can borrow up to 2%. Because we have an FRBM limit. Even if you relax it, there are 4 conditions to be met. And that is those are the conditions they have studied. And they say states cannot meet these conditions. So why will you push this to the states? And it is shocking. It's a betrayal of the trust in federalism that we are seeing. And Arun Jaitley said this in 2013. I don't trust the government, he said. Then government. BJP doesn't trust the government. So we don't want GST to be implemented. I never thought that what he said in 2013 would have glimmers today of his words.
Dr. Mitra, I get the point very clearly, but I'll persist one more time with my question. I know you're hesitant to answer it, but effectively, will this move to a dispute resolution mechanism? And if that is the case, I must ask, at this point, most states are cash strapped. And so if this becomes a prolonged resolution mechanism, what is the manner in which states are able to raise the money they need, whether it is to fund their COVID efforts, or it is to fund other developmental activities within the states?
I think you raised the dispute resolution issue. Yes, it is in the law of the
Yes.
GST Council that there should be a dispute resolution mechanism. Unfortunately, that was never set up. Number two, there's also a commitment that there should be a vice president of the council. That has never been done. That's never been done. So now the question is, as you correctly say, will it go to dispute resolution, which the mechanism has to be quickly formed, and a deadline given to the mechanism to end it? Or will it be by division, where the government comes to know what the truth is on the ground on an official basis? We have to wait and see. But it is very, very sad that we expected all this to happen smoothly, collectively, in a federal polity. And what is happening is unbelievable in the last two meetings. Yes, patiently the Union Finance Minister listens. And then comes the sudden, what in Hindi is called the pidka. Suddenly something is thrown. Last meeting options. This meeting is closed, says the Secretary. I'm hoping the Union Finance Minister listens very patiently. Will also want to deliberate on this, think about it in an objective manner, consult with economists of her choice, Reserve Bank of India, State Bank study, look at that objectively, and let us all work together shoulder to shoulder, which we have done for 40 meetings of the GST Council. So I'm hoping...
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry, I thought you paused. Is there a middle path here that's available? Is there a path where the center borrows some, the states borrow some? Because time is not on anybody's side. It is a difficult year economically. But the center needs to spend money. The states need to spend money.
It's very difficult for me to speculate. We will have to think about this. We have 7 days with us. The center has 7 days with us. It has to also reflect and introspect. And we will see. We hope the best for the country and for the current state of the economies of states and the center together.
One final question. Would you say that states have their back to the wall? Because if there is no quick resolution to this, effectively states will just have to borrow more. Whether or not they meet those conditions is one thing, but how else are you going to be able to fund your activities? If you start slashing expenditures substantially, that has its own implications macroeconomically. So it seems like states seem to have their back to the wall and will probably have to agree one way or the other.
By not giving us the compensation, as was the commitment and trust of the states, the center has pushed the states to the wall. It has not happened just like that. COVID, who is the warrior according to Sitharamanji? Correctly, it is the states, not the center. She said it correctly. So we are surrounded by catastrophic processes of the economic development of our states. Yes, we are not against the wall. We've been pushed against the wall by not committing, by not carrying out the commitment made to us. We gave up 70% of our taxes. Then we might as well go back to the VAT regime, where 70% taxes we gave up. What for? For one sentence, one assurance, one trust that we will be paid for 5 years. 5 years. And shall be paid. That one sentence in one stroke. And I chaired that empowered committee meeting in Kolkata where this decision was taken. Everybody relied on that one sentence. Arun Jaitley came down from the first floor of the hotel and said, okay, I accept shall and I accept 5 years. That is the trust which today, unfortunately, is being questioned. So it is not that we are against the war. We've been pushed against the war by what was committed to us, for which we gave up our taxation powers as states in a federal polity. And Mamata Banerjee has proposed a solution to the Prime Minister of India. We will do our job. We will push the CESS back as long as it takes, which we did yesterday as the 9th item in the agenda, which we have done it unanimously. Now the shoe is on the other foot of the government of India. Please come up. We having done our job. You come up and say, okay, you have allowed us not to pay 1 paisa from our budget, all coming from CESS indefinite period. We will borrow for you from the window that is there with the Reserve Bank for us, whereas you have no window, as the official correctly told you.
All right, Dr. Mitra, I'll leave it here for now. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and explaining so many of these issues to us. We will hope to come back to you after the next GST Council meeting, and hopefully between now and then, some sort of consensus or middle path will have arrived at. Thank you very much, sir, for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.